Need a smile behind my mask. How long will it last? Stimulus going fast. Government won't act. How long will this be going on?
Aloha, this is Skye, your Soulful progressive with FNN-Feminist News Network, that feminist news that's right for you. Welcome to Skye in the Avapui room, giving you that soulful news you need, yes indeed. And if you haven't told a friend to like and subscribe and get that soulful news that soulful way, well baby, you better let them know that I'm serving it up the Black History way. Now, what do I want to talk to you about today? What is going on? We're going to talk about Palestine and the Gaza area and what Israel is doing to Palestine. And I'm not going to say it with my usual, but I'm letting it be said through the voices of independent media. Now, watch, and we'll see if we need to discuss.
The first thing to mention is that Black people have always been in the efforts of creating an international global understanding of power and how power works. Ethel Miner from SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, linked earlier in the 60s, late 60s, linked the Black liberation struggle in the U.S. to anti-colonial struggles abroad. So this is something that we have done. Black people have always been aware, as we have felt and experienced this country as second-class citizens, that this country has not just violated us, but it continues to violate and harm people across the globe. And that in order for our liberation to be possible, we have to understand the way that power works. All relationships, as organizers, we understand relationships is the fundamental function of any organization or any community. So every relationship is a negotiation between power. What ways is power used and exercised, and in what ways is power abused, right? And generally, governments have the ability to withstand certain representation, expressions of power with militarized force. So the people have to be very aware of their own power to push back on the ways that the government applies force and what it decides to take care of and not take care of.
I'm here to remind you that all babies matter, even Palestinian babies.
Palestinians are being told the same thing as Black folks in America. There is no acceptable form of resistance. We are bearing witness to egregious human rights violations. The pain, trauma, and terror that Palestinians are facing is not just the result of this week's escalation, but the consequence of years of military occupation. We cannot stand idly and complicitly by and allow the occupation and oppression of the Palestinian people to continue. We cannot remain silent when our government sends $3.8 billion of military aid to Israel that is used to demolish Palestinian homes, imprison Palestinian children, and displace Palestinian families. A budget is a reflection of our values. I'm committed to ensuring that our government does not fund state violence in any form, anywhere.
I am the only Palestinian American member of Congress now, and my mere existence has disrupted the status quo. I am so personal for me. I am a reminder to colleagues that Palestinians do indeed exist, that we are human, that we are allowed to dream. We are mothers, daughters, granddaughters. We are justice seekers and are unapologetically about our fight against oppressions of all forms. And colleagues, Palestinians aren't going anywhere no matter how much money you send to Israel's apartheid government. If we are to make good on our promises to support equal human rights for all, it is our duty to end the apartheid system that for decades has subjected Palestinians to inhumane treatment and racism.
Look, if you called Israel an apartheid state on air on cable news just a couple of years ago, you would have been taken off the air for sure. And anybody that denies it is totally not living in reality.
Palestinians, that's great. Let me give you some more information regarding the topic, because this topic is often misinterpreted in media, as well as ways you can actually help Palestinians. The ethnic cleansing, genocide, the settlers, people being kicked out of their home, people being bombed and murdered every single day, it's been going on actually for decades. The fact that some of you guys don't even know this shows exactly how the media is hiding it. The reason the media is hiding it is because Israel has a very strong foothold in the world, especially in the U.S. The U.S. actually gives them billions of dollars per year, so your taxpayer money is going into the genocide and ethnic cleansing, as well as other companies in America that actually support Israel's army as well. Reminder that Palestinians aren't just Muslim, they're Jewish, Christian, and Muslim Palestinians in Palestine. This is not a religious issue, this is a political and humanitarian one. The best way you can actually help Palestinians is by donating, spreading awareness, but the best way you can help is actually contacting Congress. If you click on the first link in my bio, that first link right there is a petition by the representative in Congress, as well as other ways you can contact your government to force change. That, protesting, and boycotting.
Boycott, divest, sanction, right? That's a whole other show topic, right? The way the BDS movement has been attacked and maligned by the highest in politics in this country. I believe it was Joe Biden. Didn't Joe Biden shit on BDS? But first of all, thank you very much to that young lady for, again, cramming a lot of information in a very brief time. And one thing that she said that sort of jumped out, it absolutely jumped out, that please understand this. This is not a religious conflict, okay? Palestinians are not a monolith. They are not all Muslim, right? Christian and Jew are what Palestinians are. But what they are is a people caught up in an apartheid system.
They also voted to keep the embassy in Jerusalem and not put it back in Tel Aviv. So that lets you know their alliance with Israel is still the same, no matter if it's Republican or Trump or them, the Democrats. What does it mean for Palestine? I don't know.
Has been occupying Palestinian territory for decades now. The West Bank, obviously, but also Gaza. Even though they pulled out troops, they control the airspace, they control the border, they control the sea lanes, they control everything about Gazan life. So Israel is an occupying power in the Palestinian territories in a way that the UN has ruled is illegal. So they're not just occupiers, but illegal occupiers. So how is it possible to even talk about self-defense when you're talking about a military that is occupying another country? It would be like if, you know, the Chinese army invaded the United States, and then when Americans fought back, the Chinese would say, we're just engaging in self-defense on American soil. The whole framework makes no sense. But so that's always the context. And aside from the huge power differential, which is that you're talking about an extremely powerful military, which is Israel, largely as a result of billions of dollars every year that get transferred in American taxpayer money to the Israelis so that they can buy weaponry, some of which is from American manufacturers, others of which are not, combined with a population that use stones and primitive rockets. So there's a huge power differential as well between the two sides. And the latest quote-unquote skirmishes are happening because in East Jerusalem, which under international law and every single accord that has ever been presented is Palestinian territory, more and more settlers are making incursions, and they're trying to evict Palestinians from their homes that they've been in for decades in order to make way for even further Israeli settlements, on top of which there was a incursion into one of the holiest mosques in all of Islam by the Israeli military that obviously is a huge accelerant to the tensions as well. What religion in the world would accept that? What people in the world would accept an occupation of this barbarism and this duration?
You know, we're talking about grotesque poverty. And in the context of that grotesque poverty, we're now adding additional strife from the standpoint of attacks. What they would say is, we struck a hub of Hamas. What the truth of it is, that is an apartment building that may have had those various functions in it, but some of those functions are just media. You must understand, Hamas is also a political party. It's not just terrorists in the way that they're talking about terrorists. And honestly, from the standpoint of an oppressive apartheid system, you can't necessarily blame the people who are under that apartheid system for developing a strain of thought that pushes back against the people who are basically running that apartheid system.
So before the current crisis, Gazans already lived in what one UN human rights official called a toxic slum, a jagged strip of land blockaded indefinitely by Israel and Egypt, whose roughly 2 million residents endured daily power outages of up to 16 hours and running water that worked only every other day. Well, now, after the massive aerial bombardment campaign, they're down to about 5 hours of electricity per day and half their usual water supply. So obviously, the situation right now is insane. It's unthinkable. It was insane and unthinkable before. So what are they supposed to do? And for how many years are they supposed to do it? Not just, like, to be able to totally control their own, like literally be able to live with electricity and water as we would expect for any human living in any portion of the world. I have no idea. I'm sure they're confused too, because it doesn't seem like there's anything they can do, peace or conflict, organization or chaos, that will actually result in any bettering of their lives.
Yeah. Like, you know, talk to young people in America. The sentiment around Israel ain't the way it used to be.
That's
and
right.
Once again, I blame them. They are the ones who politicize politicize themselves in our politics, aligning themselves with the GOP on the Iran deal, and it doesn't matter.
Obviously, I would like the international community to hold Israel accountable under international law, but I also hope free people of the world do their part to push their governments.
Do you support the protests, the violent protests that have erupted in solidarity with you and other families in your position right now?
Do you support the violent dispossession of me and my family?
Pretty incredible moment there at the end, just showing how the framing of this can be very one-sided in terms of the media. As a side note, Muhammad was arrested the very next day. He's obviously incredibly effective and brilliant writer and advocate for his family and for other Palestinians. He got asked the question there, like, what do you want to see from the Biden administration? He says, I have very low expectations. We've already heard Ned Price, the clip we played on this show, refusing to condemn even the killing of Palestinian children. And in fact, he was correct to have very low expectations for the Biden administration. Joe Biden has had a long career of being very one-sided in terms of, you know, support for military aid for Israel without any justification or any strings attached whatsoever.
Reducing Palestinians to live in utter fear and terror of losing a child, being indefinitely detained or killed because of who they are, and the unequal rights and protections they have under Israeli law. It must end. One of Israel's most prominent human rights organizations, B'Tselem, has declared Israel an apartheid state. Human Rights Watch recently recognized it too. This is what Palestinians living under Israel's oppression have been telling us for decades. I have been told by some of my colleagues who dispute the truth about segregation, racism, and violence in Israel towards Palestinians that I need to know the history. What they mean, unintentionally or not, is that Palestinians do not have the right to tell the truth about what happened to them during the founding of Israel. They are, in effect, they erase the truth about ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in Israel, that some refer to as the Nakba, our catastrophe. As Palestinians talk about our history, know that many of my black neighbors, indigenous communities, may not know what we mean by Nakba, but they do understand what it means to be killed, expelled from your home, land, made homeless, and stripped of your human rights. My ancestors and current family in Palestine deserve the world to hear their history without obstruction. They have a right to be able to explain to the world that they are still suffering, still being dispossessed, still being killed as the world watches and does nothing. As Peter Beinart, an American of Jewish faith, writes, quote, "When you tell a people to forget its past, you are not proposing peace. You are proposing extinction. The Palestinian story is that of being made a refugee on the lands you called home. We cannot have an honest conversation about U.S. military support for the Israeli government today without acknowledging that for Palestinians, the catastrophe of displacement and dehumanization in their homeland has been ongoing since 1948. To read the statements from President Biden, Secretary Blinken, General Austin, and leaders of both parties, you'd hardly know Palestinians existed at all.
They're turning life in Gaza, which is already a disaster area, as a result of the siege, they're turning it into sheer hell. And as you mentioned, there were so many people killed. It's not, I mean, it's difficult for us to talk about statistics. But when I read stories, when I see pictures of whole families, a mother and her 3 kids, bombed, shelled, destroyed, killed brutally in their own homes, in their own beds. This is what the reality of living under occupation is, under a state of siege, where Israel has unlicensed, has total license to use unbridled power to kill and destroy and maim and get away with it. And then you get people like Biden and others say Israel has the right to self-defense. I will repeat something I've said and I continue to say, there is no normality under occupation. This is an abnormal situation, and an occupier who's oppressing a whole people cannot claim self-defense if its victims decide to strike back even in a minimal way. It's the real issue is the occupation.
All relationships, as organizers, we understand relationships is the fundamental function of any organization or any community. So every relationship is a negotiation between power. What ways is power used and exercised, and in what ways is power abused, right? And generally, governments have the ability to withstand certain representation, expressions of power with militarized force. So the people have to be very aware of their own power to push back on the ways that the government applies force and what it decides to take care of and not take care of. And so Black people, we see the ways that we have felt second class. We have felt as if we're living in an apartheid state. We're having 2 Americas, as people say. And then when we learned in Ferguson, what we learned about the militarization of the police, the way the police became so much more forceful, that their gear was like army gear, their gear and the ways that they used tear gas. So we had Palestinians sending information on how to respond to that, because many of our police officers were being trained by folks, by the IDF in Palestine. So we see that our oppressors are connected, right? They're linked, they're having conversations and discussions with one another about how to exercise these abuses of power, colonialism and imperialism across the globe. Therefore, our struggle for liberation and freedom has to be connected. We have to see where do our struggles overlap. And I'll say one thing that I think is really important that Edward Said said that I think Black people have to be aware of, right? Many times Zionists use the narrative and the story around their personal abuse and their personal victimization to justify the need for the state of Israel. And it's very important that us as Black people observe what is happening so that we do not become the very thing that we loathe, that we do not become the thing that has terrorized us.
It's ugly out there. And if you agree with me, leave those comments below and let me know at FeministNewsN@gmail.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe to that YouTube channel and that Facebook page. And remember, I'm that Soulful Progress 1 on Twitter, got that rant of the day on Blogger. And thanks for joining the news group. Alright, now if you got a story you want me to tell or get into, just let me know and I'll do it with soul. Now, remember, in this era of hate, you're going to have to participate. Because if you don't, there's going to just be more depression. Thanks for watching. Thanks for joining. Peace.
See the smile behind my mask, how long will it last? Stimulus going fast, government won't act, how long will this be going on? I'm standing here in line, struggling with my time. The people just keep lying. I keep trying. How long will this be going on? Yeah, how long will this